I still remember the sound of the door. It wasn't just a door slamming shut, it was the sound of my life collapsing. A cold, final thud that echoed down the hallway as I stood there, 7 months pregnant, holding a plastic bag with a few clothes, my heart shattering with every step I took away from what I thought was home. My name is Rachel Moore, and once upon a time, I believed love was enough to hold a family together. I believed that if you gave your heart fully, people would see your worth. I was wrong. When I married Ethan, I didn't just marry him, I married his family. His parents, Margaret and Charles, owned a sprawling farmhouse just outside of Seattle. They had money, land, and opinions, lots of them. From day one, I could feel Margaret's eyes scanning me, evaluating, judging, finding me lacking. She'd smile sweetly when Ethan was around, then whisper little barbs when he wasn't. "You're a sweet girl, but Ethan deserves someone with a real future. Oh honey, maybe you shouldn't talk about your past. It's not very refined." I tried to ignore it. I thought she'd come around once she saw how much I loved her son. But love wasn't enough for Margaret. To her, love didn't mean loyalty, it meant control. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought everything would change. I thought maybe, finally, she'd see me as part of the family. Ethan was thrilled, or at least he said he was. But slowly, his warmth faded. He started coming home late, avoiding eye contact, mumbling excuses that made less and less sense. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining, cold, relentless, merciless. I remember because I could hear the drops hitting the window as I sat on the couch, waiting for Ethan to come home. My phone lit up with a message. It wasn't from him. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "You should know what your husband's been doing. Check his phone." I didn't want to believe it. But when he finally walked in, half drunk and smelling like cheap perfume, something inside me broke. I waited until he fell asleep, then I looked. And there it was. Dozens of messages. Pictures. Her name was Samantha, a woman from his office. The next morning, I confronted him. He didn't deny it. He just shrugged, as if my pain was an inconvenience. Then Margaret walked in. She must have overheard, because her face was already twisted with disdain. "I told you," she said coldly, "he needed someone better. Someone who wouldn't drag him down." I couldn't even speak.
My body was shaking, the baby inside me moving as if sensing my fear.
When Ethan left for work, she turned to me with a smile that chilled my bones. "You should go," she said.
"You're not welcome here anymore. You've done enough damage."
I thought she was bluffing, until she called a cab. She stood by the door, arms crossed, while I packed whatever I could fit in one small bag. When I begged her to let me stay just until I found somewhere else, she said, "You made your bed, Rachel. Now lie in it." Then she slammed the door.
I walked 4 blocks in the rain, my feet swollen, my heart breaking. No one came after me.
Not Ethan. Not his parents. No one. I ended up in a women's shelter. It was cold, loud, and crowded, but at least there were kind faces. I gave birth to my daughter, Lily, 2 months later, in a charity hospital with a volunteer nurse holding my hand. When I looked at Lily's tiny face, I made a promise: no one will ever make me feel powerless again. Those first few years were brutal. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. I slept 3 hours a night and barely ate, just to make sure Lily had enough formula. But I never gave up. I started taking online classes, studying real estate and property management. I learned how to save, how to invest, how to build something out of nothing. I met people who believed in me, mentors who saw the fire that pain had lit inside me. By the time Lily was 6, I had my own small real estate firm. By the time she was 10, I was buying homes instead of cleaning them. And by the time she turned 15, I was sitting at a boardroom table, signing papers for a property worth more than the entire Moore estate. Funny how life works. Because one of those properties, the one with the old oak trees and white porch railings, looked eerily familiar. When the broker handed me the file, I froze. The address. The photos. It was their house. Ethan's parents' farmhouse. Apparently, after Charles passed, the property went into debt. Margaret couldn't maintain it. Ethan had disappeared after losing his job, and the family had no one left to turn to. It was going up for foreclosure. And the buyer was me. I didn't hesitate. I signed every paper, my hand steady, my heart racing with poetic justice. I didn't buy it out of hate, I bought it because life had given me a story that needed a full circle. A week later, I drove there. The same gravel driveway, the same mailbox, the same smell of pine and rain. Except this time, I wasn't the girl with trembling hands. I was a woman who had built her own empire from the ashes of her pain. When I pulled up, I saw her, Margaret, sitting on the porch in an old shawl, thinner, older, her eyes sunken but still filled with pride. She didn't recognize me at first. "Can I help you?" she asked sharply. "Yes," I said, stepping out of the car. "I'm your new landlord." Her face went pale. She tried to speak, but words failed her. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her the way she once looked at me, calm, cold, certain. "Don't worry," I said softly. "You can stay. I don't throw people out." She didn't say a word. But her eyes, oh those eyes, finally understood what mine had felt years ago. That was the first time I realized revenge didn't need to be loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, patient, dignified. And sometimes, the best revenge is living so well that the people who broke you have no choice but to rely on your mercy. But that was only the beginning. It took Margaret a full minute to process what I'd said. Her lips parted, her breath caught, and for the first time in the 10 years I'd known her, she looked small. Not intimidating, not sharp, just small. The proud matriarch who once kicked me out like unwanted trash was now staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. "Rachel," she whispered, as if saying my name might summon the past she tried to bury. "Yes," I said quietly, taking a step closer. "It's me." The wind rustled the oak trees behind us, scattering leaves across the porch. I could see her hands trembling slightly. Time hadn't been kind. The lines on her face were deeper, the color drained from her once perfect hair. There was no ring on her finger now. Charles had passed, and Ethan, well, I hadn't heard his name in years. "I didn't know," she muttered, eyes darting toward the for sale sign still leaning against the wall. "They said someone bought the house, but I didn't think it would be you." "Life's funny that way," I said. "It brings people full circle." Her eyes flickered with something between fear and shame. She didn't invite me in, and I didn't ask. I just stood there, looking at the house that had once been a battlefield. The same porch where she'd called me a mistake. The same doorway she'd closed in my face when I was 7 months pregnant. But now, I held the deed. "I suppose you'll want me out," she said, voice brittle. "I'll find somewhere else, eventually."
Il tilted my head, watching her.
"No. You can stay." She blinked. "Stay?" I nodded.
You're all, Margaret.
"And this place has too many memories to die empty."
I'm not cruel.
"I just don't throw people out into the rain." For a moment, she just stared at me. And I could see it, the exact second she realized this wasn't kindness. This was poetic justice, served cold and calm. The next few weeks were strange. I didn't move into the farmhouse right away. I kept it as an investment property, managing it from afar while Margaret remained as a tenant. But something inside me, some deep wounded part, needed closure.
So one afternoon, he drove back.
When I walked into that house again, it was like stepping through time. The smell of cedar and old furniture. The photographs on the mantel, Ethan's graduation, Charles in his military uniform, a family that once pretended I didn't exist. Margaret was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. When she looked up, her eyes softened, just a little. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I needed to see it," I said simply. I walked through each room like I was reclaiming something stolen. The living room where Ethan and I had our first Christmas. The hallway where I'd once heard Margaret whispering about me on the phone. The guest room that should have been Lily's nursery.
So many ghosts.
When I turned around, Margaret was standing behind me, her shoulders hunched. "I wasn't fair to you," she said quietly.
He almost looked.
"That's one way to put it." She nodded, her lips trembling.
Charles was pro.
"I was worse. I thought I was protecting Ethan, from what I thought was a mistake. But I didn't see what you really were." "And what's that?" I asked. "Stronger than any of us." For a second, the air felt heavy. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I could feel her words sinking into the silence between us. Later that night, I sat in my car outside, staring at the house lights glowing through the windows. I called Lily. She was 18 now, about to start college. "Mom," she said, her voice warm. "Where are you?" "Just visiting an old place," I said softly. "The past?" she teased. "Something like that." She laughed. "Don't stay there too long. You don't owe the past your peace." Her words hit me hard. She was right. But destiny wasn't done with me yet, because a few days later, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Owens. "Rachel, honey," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought you should know, Margaret fell. She's in the hospital." I didn't hesitate. I drove straight there. When I walked into the hospital room, I almost didn't recognize her. Margaret looked fragile, pale, her hair tied back loosely. A nurse was adjusting her for. When she saw me, her eyes widened with relief, and something deeper. "Rachel," she whispered. "You came." Of course I did. Tears welled in her eyes. "You didn't have to. Not after everything I did to you." "I know," I said, sitting beside her. "But I'm not you." That broke her. She started sobbing quietly, her frail hands shaking. I held her hand, not out of love, but out of something more powerful: control, grace, and closure. When she was discharged, the doctor explained that she couldn't live alone anymore. Her fall had caused serious damage. She needed full-time care. She had no one else. Ethan was gone, he'd remarried, then disappeared after another scandal. No friends left. No family who cared. And that's how the universe gave me my moment. I offered her a place to stay. In my home. The same woman who once threw me out when I was pregnant was now moving into my guest room. The first week was awkward. She barely spoke. I didn't push her. But I could feel the irony sinking in for her. Every time she saw me walking around my house, my successful businesswoman self, my independence, my confidence, it was a reminder of how wrong she'd been. One evening, she called me into the kitchen. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why?" I met her eyes. "Because I want you to see what it looks like when you treat someone with compassion, not cruelty." She lowered her gaze. "I don't deserve your kindness." "You don't," I said softly. "But that's the point." Over the next months, I watched the change happen slowly. Her tone softened. Her arrogance faded. She began asking about Lily, about my business, about my life. She even smiled sometimes. One night, as I was putting away dishes, she said something I'll never forget. "I used to think power meant control," she murmured. "But you taught me that real power is surviving what should have destroyed you, and still choosing kindness." For a moment, I saw the woman she could have been, the one buried under pride and fear. But life wasn't done teaching lessons yet. A few months later, she grew weaker. Her doctor told me her heart wasn't strong enough for surgery. She'd need long-term care. I could have sent her to a nursing home. No one would have blamed me. But I didn't. Instead, I hired a nurse to stay with her at my house. I made sure she had everything she needed. I paid for her medication, her therapy, her comfort. And one afternoon when she was strong enough to sit up, she took my hand and whispered, "I spent my whole life thinking you weren't enough. But you've become everything I wanted to be." I smiled softly. "It's funny," I said. "You told me I'd never fit in. Turns out, I wasn't meant to. I was meant to rise above." She nodded weakly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You did." When she passed peacefully a few weeks later, I didn't cry out of grief.
I criait out of release.
Because that was the moment I realized I'd won. Not by revenge, but by rising. By living well. By thriving in spite of everything that was done to me. Her will left me the farmhouse. I already owned it, but somehow, it felt different this time. It wasn't just property. It was closure. But I wasn't done yet. When Ethan called months later, his voice desperate and weak, saying he'd lost his job and needed a place to stay, I listened silently. Then I said, "You remember that door your mother slammed in my face?" He went quiet. "I do," I said. "And this time, Ethan, it's my turn to close it." Then I hung up. I always believed that life finds its own balance.
What you send out, comes back.
Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday when you least expect it, karma knocks on your door. For years, I'd thought my pain was punishment. But now, standing in the middle of the life I built, the home I owned, the company I led, the daughter I raised with pride, I understood something far greater. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The universe had stripped everything from me, so I could rebuild from the foundation up, stronger, smarter, unshakable. It had been nearly 6 months since Margaret's passing. Her absence left a strange quiet in my home. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting 2 cups of tea instead of 1, or turning to say something and remembering she wasn't there. I'd spent years resenting her, and yet in her final days, she'd become a mirror, showing me who I'd been, who I could have become, and who I chose to be instead. Her farmhouse sat empty for a while. I kept the curtains open, the windows clean, as if keeping her spirit alive a little longer. Eventually, I decided to turn it into something new, a safe home for single mothers, women like me who'd been thrown away when they needed help most. I called it Lily's Place, after my daughter. When the sign went up on the front gate, I felt something shift deep inside me, a full circle kind of peace. One sunny morning, I was reviewing the construction progress when my assistant walked into my office looking uneasy. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Do they have an appointment?" She shook her head. "No, but he says he's your ex-husband." My heart stopped for a second. I hadn't heard his name in years. I thought Ethan had vanished for good. But when he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The once confident, charming man I married now looked hollow, thinner, older, tired in the way that life exhausts people who never learned accountability. "Rachel," he said, his voice cracking. "You look good." I leaned back in my chair, my face calm. "You look terrible." He gave a dry laugh. "Fair." He hesitated before sitting down. "Listen, I'm not gonna waste your time. I messed up. I know that. I was young, stupid, and selfish," I finished for him. He nodded. "Yeah, that too." Silence stretched between us like a heavy curtain. Finally, he said it. "I lost everything. The job, the apartment. Samantha left. I've got nowhere to go." There it was. The irony of life served in a single breath. He took a deep one and looked at me like a beggar on a doorstep. "I was hoping you'd, maybe help me out. Just until I get back on my feet." I studied him for a long moment. The man who once threw me aside now sat in front of me, desperate and broken. "How poetic," I murmured. "What?" "Nothing." I smiled faintly. "You know, Ethan, your mother once said I wasn't good enough for this family. That I'd never fit in. And now here you are, asking for a roof from the woman who once begged you not to throw her out." His face crumpled. "Rachel, please. I'm not proud of what I did. But we've both changed." "Yes," I said softly. "We have." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "But here's the thing, when you left me, you didn't just break a marriage. You broke a woman who believed in you. You broke her trust, her peace, her safety. And that woman? She had to rebuild herself from the ground up, without your help, without your mercy." He lowered his gaze. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline that glowed with everything I had built. "You're right, Ethan. We've both changed. But only one of us grew from it." He looked up, desperate. "So that's it? You're just going to turn me away?" I turned back to him slowly, my expression unreadable. "No. I'm not your mother." His brow furrowed in confusion. "You can stay," I said. "But not here. You'll work at Lily's Place, the shelter I built for women like the one you abandoned." He blinked. "You're kidding." I smiled coldly. "You'll fix things. Clean. Carry. Repair. You'll serve the women you once thought were beneath you. Consider it your redemption."
Et hésita-t-elle. You did that? After everything.
"I'd do it," I said, "because I want you to understand what real strength looks like." The first few weeks were awkward. The women at the shelter didn't know who he was, but I did. And I made sure every assignment he took humbled him. Painting walls, fixing floors, cleaning the very rooms where the women he'd once ignored now slept safely. He never complained. In fact, he worked quietly, sometimes even with focus. I could see something shifting in him, not guilt, but realization. One afternoon, I walked into the shelter unexpectedly. He was helping a young mother install a crib. She thanked him with tears in her eyes. For the first time, I saw Ethan smile without arrogance. Later, as he stood outside, I approached him. "She reminded me of you," he said quietly. "That girl. Scared, lost, trying to make it work." I nodded. "She's stronger than she thinks. They all are." He turned to me. "And you?" I held his gaze. I was too. He swallowed hard.
Rachel, ino weekend what he did.
"But I'm sorry. For all of it." There it was, not an excuse, not a performance, but something raw and almost human. I didn't forgive him that day. But I felt something release inside me. Months passed. The shelter thrived. We opened 2 more branches.
Women started new lives. Children looked again.
And one morning, as I stood at the grand opening of our newest center, I looked around and realized something beautiful. My story had turned into something far greater than revenge. It had become redemption. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been broken and told they'd never rise again. When Ethan approached me after the ceremony, he said quietly, "I'll be leaving soon. Got a job out of town. Maybe it's time." I smiled. "Good. You've done your part here." He nodded. "Thank you, Rachel, for giving me another chance to be something better." I extended my hand. "Make it count this time." He shook it, firm, grateful, quiet. Then he walked away. That night, I drove back to the old farmhouse, now filled with women's laughter, children's voices, hope breathing through its walls. I sat on the same porch where I was once thrown out into the rain and whispered to the night, "We did it, Margaret. It's full again." The wind rustled the trees as if answering me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry or broken. I felt whole. Because my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my power, rewriting the ending, and turning pain into purpose. When I walked inside, a young woman from the shelter looked up at me with wide, grateful eyes. "Miss Moore," she said softly. "Thank you for this place. You saved me." I smiled. "No," I said gently. "I just built the door. You walked through it." The next morning, I stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sunrise spill gold over the fields. The same fields I once walked through in tears, pregnant and alone. Now I stood tall, calm, unbroken. This was my life. My justice. My peace. And as the light touched my face, I whispered to myself, the girl who once stood in the rain, abandoned and terrified. "You made it, Rachel. They threw you out, but you built the house." And in that moment, the past finally let me go.